My own family saw me as nothing more than a wallet. After I had given them everything, an accidental text from my daughter-in-law revealed their cruel secret truth. They spent years isolating me and showering me with fake concern, all while they were secretly drowning in debt and using me as their personal bailout plan. They thought I was just a frail old woman they could control, but they forgot one thing: I used to be a bank manager. And I was about to use their greed to orchestrate a public downfall so perfect they never saw it coming. You know, there's a certain kind of quiet that only settles into a house that's too large and too full of things no one really needs. That was the feeling at my son Mark's brunch. The air was thick with the scent of expensive lilies and catered quiche, a performance of effortless wealth that took an exhausting amount of effort. My daughter-in-law, Kara, was the director of this play. She moved through her living room like a hummingbird, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. Her conversation a carefully curated list of brand names and exclusive vacation spots. I sat on a silk-upholstered armchair that probably cost more than my first car, feeling less like the family matriarch and more like a piece of antique furniture they'd positioned for aesthetic effect. I watched my son Mark follow in her wake, echoing her points, his gaze always flickering back to her for approval. They were a team, a polished, perfect unit. And I was the silent investor, the one whose lifetime of careful saving and sensible living was funding the stage they danced on. In the weeks that followed, their performance of care intensified. It started subtly. Mark insisted on setting up all my bills for automatic payment, telling me it was to protect me from online scams. Kara would take my phone, smiling sweetly, to clear out the junk, and I'd notice later that my call history was a little shorter than I remembered. My oldest friend Maggie told me she'd tried calling a few times, but Kara always answered, explaining that I was resting and shouldn't be disturbed. They wrapped their control in the language of love, of concern for my well-being. And for a while, I let them. It was easier than arguing. Part of me, the part that had always used my checkbook to keep the peace, thought that maybe this was just my new role to be taken care of, to be quietly managed. But it felt less like a blanket and more like a cage, one woven from their gentle suggestions and my own reluctance to face the truth. The truth, when it came, wasn't a gentle suggestion, it was a slap in the face. The big event on the horizon was my granddaughter's Sweet 16 party. Kara had presented me with a budget that made my head spin: $30,000 for a teenager's birthday party. When I gently questioned the necessity of a live band and a custom ice sculpture, Kara's smile tightened. She didn't argue. She simply patted my hand and said she'd handle it. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from Kara. But I knew with a sinking cold certainty that it wasn't meant for me. I read the words, and the floor seemed to drop out from under me. I can't deal with her questioning. Ugh. You're not family, just a wallet. I just need her to sign off so the caterer is booked. Just a wallet. 3 words that burned away decades of love and sacrifice, leaving behind only the cold, hard truth of our transaction. I wasn't their mother, their grandmother. I was a resource, an account to be drawn from. And for the first time, I understood the depth of my bankruptcy, which had nothing to do with money. I sat there, numb, the phone still glowing in my hand. The house was quiet. Mark and my granddaughter were out. I eventually stood up, moving through the opulent rooms like a ghost. As I passed the study, I heard a voice from inside, a sharp, panicked whisper that was so different from Kara's usual polished tone. I stopped, hidden by the doorway. It was her on the phone, her back to me. Her voice was thin, brittle, with a fear I had never heard before. She was pleading with someone, her words tumbling out. She said the payment was late again, that the minimums were impossible. She promised she'd have the money next week. She just needed a little more time. The desperation in her voice was raw, visceral. And in that moment, listening to the terror she was trying so desperately to hide, I realized this wasn't just about a party. It wasn't about greed anymore. This was about something much deeper, much darker. And the wallet she thought I was? It was the only thing keeping her from drowning. By the way, if you're enjoying the story so far, please consider subscribing so you don't miss what's next. We'd also love to hear your own story if you'd like to share it with our community. Now, let's get back to it. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay there, the words just a wallet, echoing in the dark, mingling with Kara's panicked whispers about late payments. But it wasn't a night of tears. The shock had burned away, the hurt leaving behind something cold, hard, and incredibly clear. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking like a mother or a grandmother. I was thinking like a bank manager. And my first order of business was to conduct an audit. The next morning, I came down to the kitchen to find Kara and Mark already there, the illusion of the perfect family breakfast in full swing. I smiled a genuine feeling smile for the first time in a long while because I finally had a purpose. I poured myself a coffee and sat down, letting the silence hang for a moment before I dropped my little bombshell. I told them cheerfully that I was so excited about the party. I'd been reviewing my statements last night to see how to best free up the cash. And in doing so, I explained I saw several large charges at some high-end boutiques I didn't recognize. I'd gone ahead and put a temporary freeze on the card, just as a precaution. I said we'd all have to sort it out with the bank on Monday. The effect was immediate and deeply satisfying. Mark, bless his heart, just looked confused, saying he was sure there was a simple explanation. But Kara turned pale. A splotchy red rash crept up her neck. She started to stammer, her hands fluttering nervously. She claimed she'd used the card for party supplies, but the words came out in a jumbled, unconvincing rush. The names of the boutiques were for fashion, not floral arrangements, and we all knew it. Mark tried to jump in and smooth things over, but Kara shot him a look of such pure, terrified rage that he actually recoiled. In that one unguarded glance between them, I saw it all, their complete lack of a cohesive story, the sheer amateur hour of their entire deception. They had never once considered that the wallet might check its own balance. The argument started as soon as they thought I was out of earshot. Their voices carried from the study, sharp and panicked. This was my chance. I walked calmly into the sunroom, pulled out my own cell phone, the one they thankfully still thought I only used for solitaire, and dialed a number I knew by heart. Maggie answered on the second ring. I kept my voice quiet, but firm. I told her something was wrong and that I needed her help. I asked her to come over the next morning and to just show up no matter what anyone said on the phone. She didn't ask questions. A lifetime of friendship meant she didn't need to. She just said she'd be there. Hanging up, I felt the first real flicker of strength. I had an ally. My first asset in what was quickly becoming a very hostile takeover. My little probe had worked, but it also had consequences. Kara, feeling exposed, went into lockdown mode. Her campaign of care became an iron-fisted rule. Suddenly, I couldn't go for a walk by myself because she was worried I might fall. She insisted on driving me everywhere, even to the local library. My phone calls were monitored more closely than ever, her head popping around the door with a bright, false smile anytime it rang. The atmosphere in that beautiful sunlit house became suffocating thick with her unspoken panic and my unspoken knowledge. I realized then that the situation was far more dangerous than I had thought. Kara's desperation was a cornered animal, and she would do anything to protect the crumbling facade of her perfect life. I wasn't just a wallet to be drained anymore. I was a hostage. When Maggie arrived the next morning, the doorbell chimed like a bell before a prize fight. Kara answered her smile a mask of strained hospitality. I had decided on my strategy. I would play the part they had cast for me. I shuffled into the entryway, leaning heavily on my walker, and gave Maggie a slightly confused smile. I let Kara do all the talking, explaining how I hadn't been myself lately, how I was getting forgetful. Maggie, bless her, played along beautifully, her eyes conveying a deep well of understanding just for me, while her face showed polite concern for Kara. I let my daughter-in-law steer me to a chair, fetch me tea I didn't want, and prattle on about my health. I could feel Kara's smug satisfaction radiating off her. She thought my little credit card stunt was a one-time blip, a moment of senile confusion. She believed she had me perfectly under control, a frail old woman who had been gently put back in her box. It was exactly what I wanted her to think. Later, after Maggie had left with a reassuring squeeze of my hand, I watched from the window as Kara got into her pristine SUV and drove away. In my mind, I saw the scene I couldn't see in person, piecing it together from the clues she'd dropped. I pictured her in that leather-scented car, the polished mask falling away the second she was alone. Her phone would be in her hand, the screen a nightmare of red notifications from credit card apps, the balances climbing into the tens of thousands. A call would come through from a blocked number, a debt collector with a voice that was patient but firm, and her carefully constructed composure would crumble. I could almost see a memory flashing in her mind. A sleek office, a so-called wealth advisor, painting a glittering picture of investments and returns, subtly pressuring her into a world she couldn't afford. He'd made it sound so easy, so normal for Westchester. All her friends talked about were their summer homes in the Hamptons and ski trips to Aspen. Her desperation wasn't just about greed. It was a deep, pathological fear of not belonging, of being exposed as an imposter in the world she so desperately wanted to conquer. That afternoon, I told them I was feeling tired and was going up for a nap. They were thrilled to have me out of the way, but I wasn't sleeping. I was in my room with the door locked, my old laptop humming quietly. My past life as a bank manager came rushing back, the skills sharp and ready. I wasn't just checking my accounts anymore, I was moving my assets. With a series of clicks, I transferred the bulk of my liquid wealth, the money they saw as their endless slush fund, into a brand new account at a completely different bank, an institution they didn't even know I had a relationship with. I spent an hour researching lawyers who specialized in elder financial abuse and sent a carefully worded email to the top-rated one in the state. And then I did something for myself. I found the website for the local community center, the one they always drove past, on the way to the country club. They were looking for volunteers to help run a financial literacy program for young families. I filled out the application. It was time to put my money and my mind to better use. The arrogance of a cornered person who thinks they've escaped is a staggering thing to behold. Kara, believing I was now completely subdued and compliant, made her fatal mistake. My phone buzzed late in the afternoon. It was a text from her accompanied by a picture of a gleaming new luxury SUV with a giant red bow on the hood. The message was breezy, almost giddy with her victory. She said she'd bought a little something to make getting around easier for all of us and that I would love it. She had used another one of my credit cards, one I had deliberately left active as bait, to put down the deposit. I stared at the picture, at this flagrant, arrogant act of theft presented as a thoughtful gift. I felt a surge of cold, clear fury. She hadn't just stolen from me. She had handed me the one thing I needed: most concrete, undeniable, and beautifully documented evidence. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for her to walk into it. I let a few days pass after Kara's disastrous car purchase. I let her enjoy her hollow victory, driving the ostentatious vehicle to the club and the market projecting an image of success that was bought with my money and her lies. My lawyer had given me clear instructions, and my own banking experience told me that timing was everything. The day I chose was a Tuesday. I had Maggie come over in the afternoon, and together we sat at the grand dining room table. Between us, I placed a neat, formidable stack of papers. It was a simple, powerful stage. When my son Mark came home from work, he found us there waiting in the quiet of the late afternoon. He stopped in the doorway, his briefcase in hand, sensing immediately that this was not a casual visit. I looked at him, my own son, and with a voice that was perfectly calm and firm, I told him that we needed to talk. Maggie, my silent pillar of support, simply gave a slow, deliberate nod. Kara came in a few minutes later, humming a little tune, still high on her perceived success. The humming stopped the moment she saw the scene at the table. Her eyes darted from me to Maggie, then landed on the stack of papers. The color drained from her face. She knew. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I simply began. I calmly presented the first exhibit, a high-quality printout of the text message she had sent me, the words, "Just a wallet," stark and ugly on the page. Next, I laid out the credit card statements, the fraudulent charges from the boutiques highlighted in yellow. And finally, I slid the sales agreement for the new luxury car across the polished wood of the table. The silence was absolute. And then Kara's polished facade didn't just crack, it exploded. A raw, guttural sob ripped from her throat, a sound of pure animal despair. The confession came tumbling out between desperate, ugly gasps. She told us everything. The mountains of credit card debt from trying to keep up the high-interest private loans she'd taken out in secret, the constant crushing terror of being exposed as a fraud among her wealthy friends. She admitted, her voice choked with shame, that she had come to see my home, my savings, my entire life's work as her only way out. The confession detonated in the center of our family, and the shrapnel hit my son the hardest. Mark stared at his sobbing wife, his face a mask of disbelief and horror. He had been a willing participant in their lifestyle, but it was clear he had no idea of the true scale of their financial ruin or the depths of his wife's deception. He looked from the papers on the table to me, and I saw a wave of shame wash over him so profound it made him physically flinch. He looked at Kara, and the pity in his eyes was mixed with a cold, sharp disgust. The conspiracy of two, the united front they had always presented to me, fractured right there at that table. He turned on her, his voice low and trembling with rage, demanding to know how she could do this, how she could do this to his mother. In the chaos of their broken partnership, I took absolute control. I waited for Kara's sobs to subside and for Mark's angry questions to run out of steam. Then I spoke. I told them with the cool finality of a bank manager closing a delinquent account that all the credit cards they had access to were canceled. I told them that the car would be returned to the dealership the next morning, and finally I informed them that they would both be attending financial counseling with a therapist of my choosing, starting next week. I let my gaze rest on them both, two broken people who had tried to break me. I made it clear these were not requests. They were my terms. I left them there in the wreckage of their own making, powerless and terrified, with the unspoken threat of legal action hanging between us like a guillotine. The power had shifted. The wallet was closed. The month that followed the confrontation was one of quiet, seismic shifts. Mark and Kara were compliant. They returned the car. They started the counseling. The oppressive tension in their home was replaced by a hollow, awkward silence. On my end, I threw myself into my new project at the community center. I had almost forgotten the deep satisfaction that comes from using your skills to genuinely help someone. The final act of this drama, I decided, wouldn't take place in a lawyer's office or a courtroom. It would happen in the heart of the community they tried so desperately to impress. The stage was the center's annual fundraiser, a bustling affair filled with the very people Kara had once worked so hard to emulate. I was invited as a guest of honor. I made it clear to Mark and Kara that their attendance was not optional. It was a mandatory part of their restitution. They arrived looking like ghosts at a feast, stripped of their usual social confidence. Kara wore a simple dress, her face pale and strained. They hovered near the back of the room, completely out of place, no longer the center of attention, but awkward, irrelevant satellites in an orbit they no longer controlled. The evening's program began, and eventually the director of the community center, a warm, energetic woman named Maria, took the stage. My heart beat a steady rhythm. This was it. Maria spoke about the center's mission, and then she began to talk about a new program, one that had already made a remarkable difference. She spoke about a new volunteer, a retired bank manager who brought decades of wisdom and a deep sense of compassion to their work. She didn't just thank me for a donation, she thanked me for my time. She told the crowded room the story of a young local couple who had dreamed of buying a home but were drowning in student debt and confusion. She described with genuine emotion how I had sat with them for weeks, personally, mentoring them, helping them create a budget, and empowering them to take control of their future. The room was silent, listening intently. She was telling them my story, but not the one of betrayal and pain. She was telling them the story of my purpose. After the speech, the true judgment was delivered not by me, but by the community itself. People didn't approach me to talk about my wealth or to offer pity. They came to talk about the program. Old friends and neighbors I hadn't seen in months came up to praise what I was doing, some even sharing their own financial anxieties in hushed, trusting tones. They saw me not as a poor old woman or a wealthy widow, but as a pillar of wisdom, a valuable part of their world. Across the room, I could see Kara standing alone. She was forced to watch as I was showered with the one thing she had craved her entire life: genuine respect, authentic admiration. It was something she had tried to buy, to manipulate, to force into existence, and here it was, being given freely to the woman she had dismissed as a wallet. She wasn't shunned or shamed. She was simply invisible. Her currency of status was worthless here. The final powerful act of justice came at the end of the night. The young couple from Maria's story, who were revealed to be the event's incredibly talented caterers, came over to give me a hug. With them standing by my side, I took the microphone Maria offered me. I announced that a month ago I had been preparing to spend a significant amount of money on a Sweet 16 party, but I explained my family, and I had decided there was a better use for those funds. I announced the creation of a new permanent grant at the center, administered by me to help other young families in the community achieve the same kind of financial stability. I had redirected the pipeline of money. It would no longer fund a toxic, hollow facade. Instead, it would build real homes, real futures, a real community. In that public, joyful moment, I reclaimed my identity not as a wallet, but as an investor in people. And the sound of the room erupting in applause was the only verdict I ever needed. I didn't go home with them after the fundraiser. I stayed late, chatting with my new friends, basking in the warm glow of a community I was now truly a part of. I learned later, through the quiet, inevitable churn of town gossip, what that car ride home was like. A tense, crushing silence filled with the weight of everything they had lost. The social humiliation was absolute and complete. There was no coming back from it. Within a few weeks, a for sale sign appeared on their immaculate lawn. The house, the grand stage for their performance of wealth, was sold. Their fall from grace wasn't loud or dramatic. It was a quiet public spectacle, a slow fading from the society pages into a modest, anonymous apartment complex on the other side of town. In the months that followed, they walked two very different paths. My son Mark, humbled to his core, committed himself to the financial counseling. He began to genuinely repair his relationship with me, not with grand apologies, but with small, consistent acts of respect. He called just to talk. He asked for my advice on a small investment he was considering. He was rebuilding our connection on a foundation of honesty, not expectation. Kara's journey was harder. For a long time, she remained a fortress of bitterness and resentment. But the loss of her social standing, the very thing that had defined her, forced a slow, painful reckoning. With nothing left to perform for, she had to finally face herself. I heard a few months ago that she had quietly enrolled in a local community college course. It was a small glimmer of hope, a first tentative step toward building an identity that was actually her own. As for me, I thrived. I moved back into my own home, and the silence I once dreaded was now filled with life. My financial literacy program at the community center became a local success story. My new found family, Maggie, the young couple I'd mentored, and a dozen other wonderful people from the center turned my house from a quiet sanctuary into a warm, bustling hub. We had potlucks in the backyard and book club meetings in my living room. There was always a pot of coffee on, and the sound of genuine laughter echoed in the halls. I had spent so many years trying to buy my family's love only to discover that the most valuable things in life, true connection, purpose, and respect, were waiting for me, and they were free. The final, perfect grace note of my new life came 6 months later on a warm summer afternoon. I stood in my own backyard under the shade of an old oak tree, officiating the wedding of that wonderful young couple I had mentored. The yard was filled with their friends and family, and my own found family was there beaming. I looked out at their hopeful faces and spoke about the value of building a life not on appearances, but on a foundation of trust, shared values, and mutual support. From a distance, I saw my son Mark standing by himself near the back. He wasn't looking at the bride and groom. He was looking at me. And on his face was a look of quiet, unmistakable pride. He was there as a guest, not as an heir. And in that beautiful, sun-drenched moment, I knew my transformation was complete. I had taken the pain of my past and turned it into wisdom. I had taken the wealth they coveted and turned it into a tool for my community. I had built a new, peaceful, and permanent reality entirely on my own terms. Evelyn's story teaches a powerful lesson about the nature of value. For years, she operated under the quiet assumption that her financial generosity was the glue holding her family together, a currency she could use to purchase love and respect. The cruelest lesson was learning that her worth had been reduced to a number in a bank account. Yet her ultimate victory wasn't in revenge, but in reinvestment. By redirecting her resources away from a toxic facade and into her community, she discovered that true family isn't about blood, but about the bonds of authentic connection and mutual respect.